Have you ever sat quietly at the kitchen table and wondered, when did the way they talked to me begin to feel so different? It wasn't always like this. There were years when your voice mattered, when you were the one they came to, when your presence lit up the room. But somewhere along the way, something shifted. Now it feels like you're walking on eggshells in your own home, or on the sidelines of conversations that seem to move on without you. You might tell yourself, they're just busy, or they didn't mean it that way. But inside, a quiet ache forms, not just because they've changed, but because you feel yourself changing too, shrinking in ways that don't feel like you. Less heard, less needed, less seen. If any part of that rings true, I want you to know you're not alone. And no, it's not your imagination. Sometimes, even those we love most, our own children, siblings, even grandchildren, can manipulate us without ever raising their voice or saying a cruel word outright. And we, out of love, out of habit, or out of guilt, let them. I want to talk to you today, not as a lecturer or therapist, but as someone who's seen too many good, kind-hearted people doubt themselves into silence. We're going to gently walk through this together, not to place blame, but to reclaim your peace, your voice, your dignity. I remember a woman named Laura. She's 68 now. Her days are quiet, her garden well-tended, her heart full of stories. But for years, she lived with a weight she couldn't quite name. Her daughter, Nicole, would often call not to ask how Laura was doing, but to ask for help. Babysitting, errands, financial support. And every time Laura said yes, even when she was exhausted, there'd be no thank you, just another request a week later. At first, she told herself it was normal. Family helps family, but over time, the pattern deepened. If Laura ever hesitated or tried to say no, Nicole would sigh dramatically, say things like, "Fine, I'll figure it out," or worse, "I guess I can't count on anyone," and Laura would crumble. The guilt would crawl in, settle on her chest like a heavy stone. So she'd say yes again, not out of love but out of fear. Fear of losing her daughter's affection, fear of being the bad parent. This is the first quiet sign of manipulation. When love becomes conditional, when your worth in their eyes seems to depend entirely on what you can give, not who you are. That's not love. That's control in soft clothing. It's manipulation draped in family ties. It's easy to miss because it doesn't always look cruel. It can come wrapped in sweetness, even affection. "You're the only one I trust with this. I don't know what I'd do without you." Those words sound lovely. But if they're followed by a request, and if saying no makes them distant or cold, then something deeper is going on. Eric, a widower in his early 70s, once told me about his son, Justin. Justin would always joke that his dad was bad with tech, so he offered to manage all the online banking, pay the bills, handle the house paperwork. It started as a kind gesture. But over time, Eric began noticing little changes. Money moved around without his full understanding. Decisions were made on his behalf. When Eric asked questions, Justin would laugh it off. "Dad, relax, I've got this." But Eric didn't feel relaxed. He felt dismissed, stripped of autonomy, and yet, every time he tried to take some control back, Justin would act offended. "Do you not trust me now?" he'd ask, with a wounded tone. That's the second sign when manipulation makes you question your instincts. When you feel guilty just for wanting clarity, transparency, or independence. No child, no matter how grown, should make you feel ashamed for asking questions. And no love worth keeping will punish you for having boundaries. Sometimes, the manipulation is even subtler. It shows up not in what they say, but what they don't. The phone calls they don't return. The important family moments they don't include you in. The times they say, "We didn't think you'd want to come," when deep down, you would have loved to be there. This quiet exclusion, this emotional absence becomes a message. Your needs matter less. And when you try to express hurt, they call you too sensitive. Amber shared her story once. She said her daughter Tiffany would visit, bring the grandkids, and barely let her speak. Every topic became about Tiffany's life, her struggles, her stress. If Amber ever tried to bring up something she was going through, Tiffany would glance at her phone or say, "Oh, Mom, you're just overthinking again." So Amber stopped sharing. She started nodding, smiling, letting the silence grow, not because she was at peace, but because she felt invisible. That's the third sign, when your voice no longer fits in the conversation. When you begin erasing yourself in small, painful ways because being silent feels safer than being dismissed. And maybe, right now, you're thinking of someone, a person you love deeply, who perhaps never meant to hurt you, but whose behavior leaves you doubting your worth, questioning your memories, or feeling like your love is only valid when it's convenient for them. This isn't about cutting ties or holding grudges. It's about clarity, about noticing when love has started to feel like obligation. And when family starts using closeness as currency, manipulation doesn't always wear sharp edges. It can whisper, charm, and wrap itself in guilt. But your soul knows, it always knows when something isn't right. You may have spent decades teaching others how to love, how to care, how to stand tall in the face of hardship. But now, in this chapter of your life, it's time to teach yourself how to be loved without bending, how to be respected without fear, how to be heard without shouting. It starts with recognizing these signs not as failure, not as shame, but as invitations. Invitations to come home to yourself again. There's something incredibly quiet about the way self-doubt enters your life. It doesn't crash in like a storm. It seeps in gently, like a fog on a cool morning, barely noticeable at first. Until one day you realize you can't quite see yourself clearly anymore. That's what happened to Brian. He's 74, the kind of man who always tried to keep the peace. Raised in a time when conflict was considered disrespectful, Brian spent most of his adult life saying yes to avoid tension, swallowing his discomfort to maintain harmony, especially with his son, Jason, who had a fiery temperament and a clever tongue. Anytime Brian questioned something like how Jason spoke to his wife or how he was raising his own kids, Jason would snap back with, "You just don't understand, Dad. Things aren't like they were in your day." And Brian, instead of standing firm, would quietly retreat. He convinced himself he was just being old-fashioned. He didn't want to cause trouble. But what he didn't realize was that over time, he was being conditioned to stop speaking altogether, to nod, agree, and disappear into compliance. Not because he was wrong, but because conflict had been turned into a threat. That's what manipulation often does. It doesn't always ask for control directly. It teaches you that disagreeing comes with a cost. Tension, withdrawal, cold shoulders, or even losing someone's affection. So you begin to surrender not because you're weak, but because you were never taught how to protect your voice without losing love. And for many, that pattern goes back decades. Melissa, for instance, is a gentle soul. She's always been the strong one in the family, the emotional backbone. After her husband passed away, her children leaned on her even more, especially her eldest, Brandon. Every breakup, every job change, every financial hiccup, he came to her and she always helped. But then something began to shift. Melissa noticed that the moment she needed something, whether it was help with errands or just someone to talk to, Brandon was suddenly too busy. When she mentioned it, just gently, he'd say, "Mom, I've got enough stress in my life without feeling like you're guilt-tripping me." She wasn't guilt-tripping anyone. She just wanted to feel supported, too. But that's another trick manipulation plays. It flips the narrative. When you finally express a need, it paints you as demanding. When you set a boundary, it calls you ungrateful. And that's the fourth sign, when your emotions are weaponized against you. Manipulators, especially those who don't even realize they're doing it, often twist things just enough to make you feel like the problem. So you second-guess yourself. You rewrite your memories to match their story. You wonder if maybe you are being too sensitive. But let me tell you something with love and certainty. Your feelings are not an inconvenience. They are not irrational. They are the compass of your soul. And anyone who dismisses them when you express them calmly and honestly is not seeing you. They're seeing a version of you that serves their needs. And this can be the hardest part to accept. It doesn't always mean they're bad people. Sometimes manipulation isn't conscious. Sometimes it's just what they learned from you, how you taught them. With kindness, to expect selflessness, to lean on you without giving back, to see your love as endless and unquestioning. So now, you're left unlearning a dynamic you helped create, but that doesn't mean you have to stay in it. You see, when you've spent a lifetime giving, it can feel foreign, almost selfish, to finally start taking up space. But the truth is, boundaries are not walls. They're doorways to mutual respect. And the beautiful thing is, The moment you begin to honor your own space, something inside starts to breathe again. Nicole, the same daughter who leaned on Laura so often, called one afternoon, asking for another favor. But this time, Laura didn't say yes immediately. She paused, took a breath, and said, gently but clearly, "I love you, and I'm not available that day." There was silence on the other end. Then a quick, "Okay, I'll figure it out." That was it. No guilt trip, no drama, just a subtle shift. It scared Laura. At first, her hands trembled a little after she hung up the phone. But something amazing happened the next week. Nicole called again, not to ask for help, just to chat, to ask how she was doing. For the first time in years, Laura felt like a mother, not a service. And that's what happens when we reclaim our dignity, not with loud declarations, but with quiet consistency. It starts with small things, saying "I'll think about it" instead of a reflexive yes, taking time for yourself without apology, speaking your truth without wrapping it in 20 layers of justification. These aren't acts of rebellion. They're acts of restoration, because what manipulation depends on is your silence, your fear of being misunderstood. But what your soul depends on is your courage, your willingness to live honestly, even if it makes others uncomfortable for a while. You are not here to walk on eggshells in your own home. You are not here to tiptoe through your final chapters just to keep others from feeling momentary discomfort. You have earned peace, not by demand but by being who you are, someone who has given deeply, loved fully, and now deserves the same in return. It's not always easy. When you begin to say no, the people who benefited from your yes the most are often the ones who push back hardest. But remember, their discomfort is not your betrayal. It's their invitation to grow, and not everyone will take it. Some will continue their patterns. Some may pull away, hoping you'll bend again. But don't mistake their silence for truth. Often, it's simply resistance, meeting the boundaries it never expected. So you keep showing up for yourself, with tenderness, with clarity, with the quiet confidence of someone who knows that love does not have to be earned through sacrifice. You are not too much. You are not too sensitive. You are not asking for too much. You are simply remembering what it feels like to matter. And in that remembrance, your life begins to shift, not in thunderous explosions, but in small, sacred ways. It's a strange thing how respect begins to return the moment you stop chasing it. For so long, you may have felt like you had to prove your worth, to remind them again and again that you matter, that you deserve kindness, that your love should mean something. But what if you didn't have to prove it anymore? What if all that energy spent reaching outward could finally be turned inward? This is the quiet transformation. The moment you begin to stop trying to fix them and instead start healing you. Brandon, Melissa's son, didn't change overnight. He still called mostly when he needed something, still carried that familiar tone of entitlement. But Melissa had changed. She began saying things like, "I can't today, I have plans." And even if her plans were just a long walk, or a warm bath, or sitting in silence with a cup of tea, they were hers. That mattered. She stopped justifying her time, stopped apologizing for not being available. She didn't shout, didn't argue, she simply stopped bending, and something shifted. At first, Brandon sulked. He called less, but eventually, when he did call, he asked how she was. He listened. Not perfectly, but he listened. That was new. It wasn't because she demanded it. It was because she embodied it. People don't always hear your words, but they feel your energy. When you stand tall gently, quietly, they notice. It's like a tree in a storm. Others may panic, but the tree, deeply rooted, does not sway to please the wind. Eric, the widower whose son managed his finances, eventually asked for the login information to his accounts again. "Just want to stay involved," he said casually. But what he really meant was, "I'm taking my life back." And Justin hesitated. "You sure, Dad?" he asked. Eric smiled. "Yes, I've let go of too much already." There was no fight, just a return to self, and with that return came dignity, clarity, a sense of peace that doesn't need permission to exist. Because here's what often gets overlooked. Your independence is not a threat to your family. It's a gift. When you reclaim your autonomy not in anger, but in wholeness, you model something powerful, that growing older doesn't mean fading away. That love isn't obedience. That presence doesn't require performance. You begin to live with a kind of quiet joy, Joy that doesn't wait for their approval. Joy that comes from choosing how you spend your day, from reconnecting with old hobbies, or meeting new friends, or sitting beneath the afternoon sun with a book that makes you feel something again. And you know what happens then? They notice, not because you made them, not because you lectured or pleaded, but because your energy changed. You stopped chasing. You started living, and that, more than anything, invites curiosity. Amber, whose daughter Tiffany used to dominate every visit, decided one day not to wait for her daughter's attention anymore. When Tiffany came over, Amber greeted her warmly, made tea, but didn't fight to be heard. Instead, she smiled and said, "I've been learning something new. Do you want to see?" She had taken up painting. Nothing fancy, just strokes of color on canvas. But it was hers. And in that moment, Tiffany paused. "You painted this?" she asked. Surprised, Amber nodded. That moment, small as it seemed, cracked something open. Because when a parent reclaims their life not in defiance, but in joy, it reminds their children of who they are. Not just a helper, not just a background character in their adult lives, but a full, vibrant human being. This is the fifth sign, and perhaps the most heartbreaking. When manipulation convinces you that your life only has meaning through others, that you exist only to support, to sacrifice, to wait in the wings. But the truth is, your life is still yours, your laughter still matters, your opinions still matter, your joy, your rest, your dreams, yes, even now they matter. You are allowed to be whole, to be complete, to live without needing to be needed. And when you do, something beautiful happens. The dynamic shifts, not because you force it, but because you've stopped playing the role they quietly handed you. You've stepped off the stage and walked into the sun. Some relationships may grow stronger as a result. Some may become quieter, and that's okay. Not every connection is meant to deepen, but every step you take toward your own light brings you closer to peace. There will be moments of grief. Letting go of old roles means grieving who you used to be, but it also means discovering who you still are. You might wake up one morning and realize you haven't checked your phone in hours, not because no one called, but because you were content in your own stillness. You might find yourself humming again while washing dishes, or smiling for no reason as you tend to your garden. You might walk into a room and feel taller, not because they see you differently, but because you finally see yourself clearly again. That's the change, not in them, in you. And when they ask, "You seem different lately. What's going on?" You won't need a long explanation. You can simply say, "I'm coming back to myself," and that's more than enough. You don't need to be loud to be heard. You only need to stand firmly in your light. If you've stayed with me this far, I want to pause and say something very simple, but very real. Thank you. Thank you for sitting with these words, for allowing your heart to be touched, maybe even stirred. This conversation hasn't been easy. It never is. When we begin to see familiar faces with new eyes, especially when those faces belong to the people we love most, there's something incredibly brave about that. It takes courage to reflect on your life and admit, yes, something hasn't felt right for a while. It takes wisdom to begin separating love from loyalty, and loyalty from self-erasure. And it takes tenderness, not harshness, not bitterness, to make your way back to yourself after so many years of shrinking. So if your chest feels a little heavy, or your throat a little tight, that's okay. You are feeling, and feeling means you're alive, still changing, still opening. What I hope you take away from this isn't a checklist of signs or a strategy for confrontation. You don't need to arm yourself. You're not at war. What I hope instead is that this helped you feel less alone, that it gave you the language for a quiet ache you've carried for too long, that it reminded you gently but firmly that you matter. Maybe you've seen these patterns play out for years, maybe just recently. Maybe you've tried to speak up before and were silenced or dismissed. Maybe you're only now realizing how much you've given without receiving in return. Wherever you are in this journey, I want to tell you this. There is no timeline for awakening. You're not too late. You haven't missed your chance. You're exactly where you need to be to start again with clearer eyes, stronger boundaries, and a softer, more sacred love for yourself. There's a kind of power in aging that no one talks about enough. It's not about physical strength or status, it's about clarity, the ability to see what really matters, to recognize what you will no longer tolerate, to finally choose peace over performance, joy over obligation, self-respect over silent suffering. And that power, it's yours. You don't need anyone's permission to claim it. Not your children's, not your partner's, not your past's. You are allowed to say, this is not okay. You are allowed to protect your time, your heart, your spirit. You are allowed to stop explaining and start simply living. So what now? Now, maybe you start with something small, a quiet walk without your phone, a journal entry that begins, what do I need today? A deep breath before you answer a request, not to stall, but to check in with yourself, and maybe, just maybe, you begin to say no with love. Not to push people away, but to stop pushing yourself to the edge. Not to punish others, but to protect your inner peace. Because the truth is, healthy relationships can handle boundaries. Real love doesn't recoil when you say, I matter, too. If someone in your family resists your growth, questions your clarity, or accuses you of changing, that's okay. Let them adjust. Let them feel what they need to feel. But don't let their discomfort pull you back into silence. You are not here to live small so others can feel tall. You've lived too long to keep dimming your light for people who squint at your shine. So live, really live. Reclaim the parts of yourself that you set aside years ago. The music you stopped playing, the books you never finished, the friendships you neglected because someone always needed something more urgent, the quiet afternoons you gave up, waiting by the phone, hoping someone would remember you. Start again, with joy, with color, with breath. And if you've been manipulated, if your love has been used, your kindness bent into guilt, your patience mistaken for passivity, then let this be the season you stop apologizing for waking up. Because when you stand in your light, something changes not just in you, but around you. Others begin to see you differently. Not as someone to rely on endlessly, but someone to honor, to check in on, to admire. And some may never understand. Some may continue their old patterns. That's their journey. But you are no longer walking in circles. You are walking forward with grace. If this message spoke to you, I'd love to hear your story. Has your relationship with your adult children changed over time? Have you noticed signs that made you pause or reflect? What helped you cope or grow through it? Leave a comment below. I read everyone. And I know your words might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. And if this video made you feel seen, even a little, I hope you'll stay connected. This channel is a space for healing, truth, and quiet strength. Click subscribe if you want to keep walking this journey with me. You are not alone. Not now, not ever. This world is still full of love. The kind that doesn't ask you to earn it. The kind that sits with you quietly and says, you are enough, just as you are. Thank you, truly, for spending this time with me. Take care of your heart. And remember, sometimes the most radical thing you can do is simply to choose yourself. I'll see you again soon.